you know, that will basically, you know, agree to put aside those things which we can't find any way of really synthesizing and bringing together into a real genuine synthesis, so we can get on with the business of making our lives a little more comfortable.
And you have to understand that for most people this is an acceptable state of affairs. This is an acceptable way of being.
Because they have no concept that there is an alternative, and that's sad. They don't realize that there is a possible way of arriving at unity among human beings that can be freely arrived at, as it has been within the church, as we said in the last program, over the centuries, and arrive at a kind of unity within a vast area. Russia is one example. There was a country that was 1/6 of the globe, all kinds of different cultures, all kinds of different ethnic groups, and it managed to pull itself together for century after century after century, until Western concepts began to infiltrate and create class differences and ethnic differences, and create this thirst for, you know, my point of view is the right one, and that's it. Everybody else can just go their merry way, and that's basically egoism. And what is that but the fallen state of man in its most extreme form? And it's the kind of thing we're dealing with today in all kinds of different ways, on a global scale right now, and on an individual scale. And yet the Orthodox Church is there. It does have an alternative. It has a way out of this. But it requires work. It requires work, and it requires a willingness to listen. It requires a willingness to learn.
And it's not a humanistic interpretation. It comes, as you said in the first program, it is about the revelation of God, the Holy Spirit working through his conduits, if you will, at the ecumenical councils, where with people who were guided by God to codify and recognize what God wanted everyone to believe.
You know, the interesting thing is that the unity which unites the Orthodox world was a unity primarily about who Christ was, about the person of Christ. All, as we would call them, the 7 ecumenical councils dealt with who the person of Christ was. And it was Christ's person, as the Greek word hypostasis or hypostasis. It was his person which was the unifying principle which unified the world. And by being in communion with him, in his person, we found unity. I mean, every Protestant who's grown up knows that Christ has a body, and that body is his church, and that body should be united. In the absence of union, true union, of the hand with the arm, the leg, you have what we have now, which is this chaos, which is chaos in the absence of agreement.
And a very sick society.
And in response to that, a doctrine of the so-called invisible church emerged. A doctrine that somehow there was this mystical invisible church that we couldn't see. And that church was made up of all the true believers in all these different denominations. And I think that at the heart of the ecumenical movement is this belief in this invisible church. And this is one of the central reasons why the Orthodox consider this a heresy. Because Christ came into the world and created a group of apostles. And those apostles, the 12 of them, then baptized and appointed bishops. And then those bishops appointed, ordained priests and deacons. And then each successive generation then ordained new bishops. And this went on throughout history until the present time. And the Orthodox Church has been a living continuity from the apostles through the bishops over the centuries, and somehow it managed to maintain unity.
Never losing in this transference from a bishop to the next, the grace of the Holy Spirit, correct?
Right, because it was a unity not just imposed from the outside, as we were saying in the last program, but it was something that came from within each individual, meeting another mind of the same mind, because they had both been enlightened by common experience, which is what you get by attending the services, by partaking of the mysteries, and by studying the doctrines of the fathers and the writings of the fathers. And isn't it an irony that the greatest symbols of unity within the Orthodox Church are called ecumenical councils. There's that same word coming up, but in a true sense, not distorted sense that ecumenism uses of just being some kind of superficial universalism, but being the ecumenical councils, meaning the councils of the entire civilized world at the time, which was basically the Roman Empire, until basically it fell, and then the gradual spread to other societies and cultures. But there's a prime example of the doublethink that we were talking about in the last program between the way the ecumenical movement redefines concepts to suit its very ironclad, very rigid precepts, which does not allow of any real tolerance of any opposing point of view to its basic fundamental principle.
And in fact, the irony is that people will think, well, you have this Orthodox tradition, this unified tradition, which united all of these divergent peoples with multiple cultures, multiple languages. That you would think it's a monolithic institution, but in fact there was tremendous diversity in the Orthodox Church, in practice, in belief, but not about the basics, not about who Christ was. I mean, and what role the Holy Spirit played in the church, not about the basics. I mean, you could be a monastic, you could become a monk, you could be married, you could find God through a variety of means. You could practice your piety through a variety of methodologies.
You had hermits living all alone in the desert, or you had monks living in communities, or you had parish kind of life, you had soldiers, you had all the different walks of life, you had all the different, as you were saying, the languages and cultures all the way around the Mediterranean Sea, which at that time was very, very diverse.
And see, people think because they have the Roman Catholic ideal of this imposed order, as you mentioned last time, imposed from without, that what we were talking about is a kind of monolithic...
one language of Latin, yeah. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, you've got Greek, you've got Russian, you've got Syrian, you've got all, and any number of different, now that it's beginning to, the Orthodox Church is beginning to spread into the West, you've got services in Italian for Italians, you've got them in French for the Frenchmen, you've got them for Germans in German, English for the English-speaking world, and so on and so forth. Japanese, so on and so forth, all the way around the world. And there's no problem with this. The Orthodox Church always had a fundamental understanding of the nature of man, that we are individuals that are born and created with freedom.
And it's
the Roman Church, because of the theology it inherited from Augustine and certain other individuals in the West, has always had a problem with really, really sincerely accepting the freedom of the individual or of a group. And the result was that they had to create this monolithic, imposed ecclesiological structure of a church that onto a culture.
And in fact, you know the history of the Catholic Church as it came into various South American countries or around the world and simply imposed Catholicism by force on the native inhabitants. The Orthodox Church never went into a new place and imposed its faith on the church, but there was always...
It was invited.
And there was always a natural order. I mean, when the Russians first went to Alaska, and among the Aleut Indians, the Indians converted to Orthodoxy. They weren't forcibly converted.
That we simply go, we live our life. People, hopefully, if we live our life properly, according to the basic Orthodox precepts of Christianity, they see that this is a sincere and genuine and free and loving Christianity, and they're attracted to it. And they want to know, how can this be? This is something wonderful, and in many cases very new to people to live this kind of truly Christian life of love. And it's taken root in Buddhist cultures, in Hindu cultures, and so on. And it's only when you have a culture that starts out as in rebellion to Orthodoxy, as is the case of Islam and the Mohammedans,